By the mid-19th century, British political and economic policies had led many Indians to the darkness of despair. But certain events and developments invoked a growing sense of nationalism among Indians and culminated in the outright fight for independence. Pick each factor to learn more about how it contributed to the rise of nationalism in colonial India. The revolt of 1857 was a major turning point in the rise of Indian nationalism. The hanging of Mangal Pandey had sparked instant anger against the British and created a revolutionary mindset. People began to idolize contemporary revolutionaries like Rani Lakshmibai, Nana Sahib and Mangal Pandey, who raised their voices against the British. The revolt of 1857 paved way for several uprisings that expressed rebellion against the British rule. With growing access to Western education, Indians were exposed to new ideologies like liberty, democracy and nationalism that were evolving in other countries. These ideas helped Indians recognize the cruelty and exploitation of colonial rulers. Further, a country of diverse languages now became united with English as the common language of communication. The British imposed uniform laws in all their territories in India. This uniformity of law across the country further created a sense of common national identity. With the development of roads and railways and postal and telegraph systems, communication gaps were bridged. It became easier for Indians to share ideas and unite for a common purpose. Social reformers instilled a sense of national pride and self-confidence among Indians. Rather than targeting the British, they worked hard to eradicate social evils within the Indian society such as sati and child marriage. Regional press reached out to non-English readers and conveyed ideas of nationalism to Indians in the farthest corners of the country. Regional newspapers highlighted the unfairness of British policies and urged Indians to unite and work for the betterment of the nation. Novelists, authors and poets too aroused patriotic feelings among Indians through compositions in local languages. Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay's poem Vande Mataram inspired the Indians in their struggle for freedom. During British rule, India was forced to export raw materials to England at low prices and import finished goods at high prices. Originally a self-sufficient country, India grew steadily poor under these policies. Punishing taxes, failing incomes, industrial decay and an indifferent attitude of the British all combined to create a common sense of rebellion against the British. The Indians were always looked down upon by the British and were never treated as equals. Indians were not allowed to enter parks, libraries, hospitals, clubs and railway coaches that were reserved for Englishmen and women. Indians were also not allowed to hold any higher administrative post in their own country. The Ilbert Bill controversy was a major trigger in the rise of nationalism. According to the bill, Indian judges could hold trial for any accused European or British person. British refused to be judged by any Indian and strongly opposed the bill. The agitation that followed came to be known as the White Mutiny. This racial prejudice angered the Indians and highlighted the need for an all-India organization to voice their concerns. Growing nationalist sentiments led to the formation of several political associations like the Pune Sarvajanik Sabha, Madras Mahajan Sabha, the Indian Association and the Bombay Presidency Association. These associations were formed to represent the Indians as a united body. Ultimately, it was the formation of the Indian National Congress in 1885 that united Indian leaders and represented the country in its final struggle for freedom.
The establishment of the Indian National Congress in 1885 marked a new chapter in India's freedom struggle. The activities undertaken by the Indian National Congress from 1885 until independence can be broadly classified into three phases: the moderate phase, the extremist phase, and the Gandhian era. The moderate phase was led by Congress leaders from the educated middle class that demanded administrative reforms, civil rights, and economic benefits in the larger interest of all segments of society. Under administrative reforms, they demanded greater voice for Indians in administration. This would be possible by giving Indians more representation in the Legislative Council. They demanded high positions for Indians in the government. For this, they demanded that the civil service examinations be held in India and not just in London. Some other reforms included separation of the judiciary from the executive, repeal of the Arms Act, and freedom of speech and expression. The demand for Indianization of the administration arose as most important jobs at the time were monopolized by white officials. The British generally assumed that Indians could not be given positions of responsibility. Also, the British officers were sending a major part of their large salaries home. The moderates hoped that Indianization would also reduce the drain of wealth to England. The moderates also raised their voice on economic issues such as the unfair system of land revenue that had impoverished the peasants and the zamindars, especially in times of famine. Export of food grains to Europe had further caused food shortages. The Congress leaders demanded a reduction in land revenue, resolutions on salt tax, cut on military expenditure, more funds for irrigation, better treatment to be accorded to Indian laborers abroad. They also highlighted the suffering of the forest dwellers that had been caused due to interference by the forest administration. The moderates wanted to create an awareness of the unjust British practices, so they published newspapers and wrote articles to highlight how the British rule was leading to economic ruin of the country. They criticized the British rule in their speeches. The moderates believed that the British had respect for ideals of freedom and justice and hence would listen to their demands, so they gave petitions to the government to make them aware of the feelings of Indians. By the 1890s, Indians started questioning the political style of the Congress. Leaders like Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and Bipin Chandra Pal criticized the moderates for their methods of peaceful agitation and started a more radical approach to gain freedom. They envisaged India as an independent, self-sufficient, and a self-reliant nation. In this context, they believed that Indian people must rely on their own strength and not on the good intentions of the then government. They also propagated the idea of Swaraj or self-rule. Bal Gangadhar Tilak raised the slogan, "Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it." The biggest challenge to nationalism came when Lord Curzon partitioned the Bengal presidency in 1905 on the grounds of administrative convenience. However, the administrative convenience was only in the interests of the British. The larger motive was probably to weaken the influence of Bengali nationalists. Dividing the province would weaken the Bengali influence. This move infuriated the people all over India. All sections of society opposed this move. The Congress, whether the moderates or the radicals, were united on this issue and strictly opposed the partition. All over the country, people protested. Meetings were held, demonstrations organized, and new methods of mass protests adopted. They sought to oppose the British rule by boycotting foreign institutions and goods, encouraging Swadeshi enterprises, demanding national education, and promoting the use of Indian languages. This form of protest came to be known as the Swadeshi movement. The movement was strongest in Bengal, but its impact was felt all over the nation. In 1906, a group of Muslim landlords and Nawabs formed the All India Muslim League in Dhaka. The League supported the partition of Bengal. In turn, they demanded for separate electorates for Muslims. This demand was conceded in 1909. Some seats in the Legislative Council were now reserved for Muslims who would be elected by Muslim voters. Meanwhile, the Congress split in 1907. The moderates were opposed to the use of boycott. They felt that it involved the use of force. After the split, the Congress came to be dominated by the moderates, with Tilak's followers functioning from outside. The two groups reunited in December 1915. In the following year, the Congress and the Muslim League signed the historic Lucknow Pact and decided to work together for a representative government in the country. Which of the following administrative reforms did the moderates demand? What was the significance of the Lucknow Pact? The Congress and the Muslim League. Let us summarize the main points covered in this session.
The 20th century ushered in a change in the political history of colonial India. Lord Curzon, the then Viceroy, decided to divide the province of Bengal into two, Bengal and Eastern Bengal. The reason given was that Bengal was too large a province to be governed by an administrator. But the real reasons behind the partition were believed to be very different. For the one, Bengal was at the heart of Indian nationalism. The British wanted to weaken this strong base. Dividing it under two administrations would help in suppressing the Bengali influence. Another reason was to divide the Bengalis on the basis of religion by setting the Hindus and the Muslims against each other. Hence, Lord Curzon proposed the division of Bengal on July 20th, 1905. The proposal was formally accepted and granted by the British in September the same year. Finally, Bengal was partitioned on October 16, 1905. The division of the province was as follows. Bengal included the western districts of Bengal proper, parts of present-day Orissa and Bihar. Calcutta was the capital of this part. And Eastern Bengal would comprise of the eastern districts of the Bengal Presidency and Assam. Dhaka was declared as the new capital of this region. The partition not only hurt the sentiments of the Bengalis, but also shook the faith of the rest of the country. The Indian nationalists clearly saw how efficiently the British had executed the policy of divide and rule on the basis of territorial and religious grounds. The anti-partition movement was started on August 7, 1905. On this day, a large crowd staged a demonstration at the town hall in Calcutta. The British, paying no heed to the Indian sentiments, partitioned Bengal on October 16, 1905. This day was observed as the day of national mourning throughout Bengal. The day the partition came into effect, people rallied across the streets of Calcutta by walking barefoot, bathed in the sacred Ganges, and fasted for the whole day. They sang songs like Bande Mataram and Amar Shonar Bangla, penned by Aurobindo Ghosh and Rabindranath Tagore respectively. Both Hindus and Muslims celebrated the sacred ceremony of Raksha Bandhan to express their strong unity. That same afternoon, there was a large demonstration where the last speech of nationalist leader Anand Mohan Bose was read out at the time of laying the foundation of the Federation Hall that was to symbolize the unity of Bengal. Thereafter, people of both Bengals joined in and promised to follow Swadeshi. This anti-partition movement slowly spread among the common masses and thereby accelerated the national movement of India. Thus, the partition of Bengal and the anti-partition movement that followed further gave shape to Swadeshi and boycott movements. Soon, the momentum of the Indian national movement was given a new dimension by radical leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lala Lajpat Rai, Bipin Chandra Pal and Aurobindo Ghosh. Mahatma Gandhi started the non-cooperation movement as he was dissatisfied with the way the British were treating Indians. Prominent leaders such as Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose and Abul Kalam Azad supported him in this movement. Indians did different things to support Gandhi's call for non-cooperation. The masses held peaceful rallies. Important Indian personalities such as Rabindranath Tagore refused to accept titles and honors awarded by the British. Schools, government offices and services set up by the British were boycotted. British goods were picketed and set on fire. Gandhi encouraged Indians to make their own cloth. This was known as the Swadeshi movement. Due to the unfortunate incident at Chauri Chaura, Mahatma Gandhi decided to discontinue the non-cooperation movement as it went against his principles of non-violence. The British wanted to change the way India was governed. For this, in 1928, the British wanted to change the way India was governed. For this, in 1928, they formed a committee under Sir John Simon. The committee was called the Simon Commission and had only British members. They refused to include any Indians in the committee. This decision angered the Indians. Demonstrations were held all over the country. Indians boycotted the commission and demanded that Simon go back. In 1929, the Congress held its session in Lahore. This session was headed by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. At this session, it was decided to demand Purna Swaraj, or complete independence from the British. The protests against the British grew stronger. In 1930, Mahatma Gandhi launched the civil disobedience movement. Mahatma Gandhi asked Indians to refuse to pay taxes to the British government, especially the unfair tax on salt. Under the Salt Act, Indians were not allowed to make salt from the seawater. Salt making was strictly under the control of the British. Mahatma Gandhi organized the historic Salt Satyagraha movement. Along with 78 followers, he marched 385 kilometers from Sabarmati Ashram to Dandi on the seashore. Thousands of people joined them on the way. When they arrived at Dandi, they picked salt from the shore. This action stood for protest against the Salt Act. Many Indians participated in this act of revolt. British officers attacked the people at Dandi in order to stop the movement. Many people were hurt. Mahatma Gandhi and other leaders were arrested. However, the Dandi March was just the beginning of the civil disobedience movement. Led by Mahatma Gandhi, Indians across the country began to openly protest against the British through acts like burning of foreign goods and making and selling of salt. In the year 1919, the British government passed an act meant to put an end to anti-government activities of Indians. This act was known as the Rowlatt Act. It gave the British the power to arrest any Indian without a trial. Mahatma Gandhi called for an all-India strike to protest against this act. In the course of the strike, two national leaders, Dr. Kichlu and Dr. Satyapal, were arrested in the Punjab province. On hearing this, the people in Punjab turned violent. To control the situation, the British government sent a man named General Dyer. He issued an order that there should be no more public meetings or gatherings. Unaware of this order, a large number of people gathered at the Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar on the day of Baisakhi. General Dyer, furious that his orders were disobeyed, marched towards the Bagh. He and his soldiers blocked the only exit point of the Bagh. General Dyer then ordered his soldiers to open fire at the unarmed people. Fire! The shooting continued for 10 minutes until soldiers ran out of bullets. Nearly 400 men, women, and innocent children were killed and over thousands injured. Shocked by this act, Mahatma Gandhi decided to launch the non-cooperation movement. The Quit India movement was launched under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi in order to demand complete independence from British rule. Let us understand the circumstances that led to the movement. Between 1936 and 1939, the Indian National Congress emerged as powerful, independent political body. Though divided into two ideological groups, the conservative and the radical, the entire body worked towards the common goal of progress for the country. In 1939, when the Second World War broke out, the British government of India joined the war without consulting the Indian representatives. In response, the Congress leaders demanded that India should first be declared free from the British rule before it could help other nations fight for freedom. British Viceroy Lord Linlithgow failed to give any such assurance and only declared dominion status as the goal of British policy in India. The British also took advantage of differences between the Congress and the religious minorities and the princes and created rifts between them. This led to the resignation of several Congress leaders in November 1939. In 1940, the All India Muslim League demanded the division of India and creation of an independent state called Pakistan. The worsening Second World War and the change of government in Britain in 1940 made it necessary for the British government to pacify the Congress. In August 1940, Lord Linlithgow made a new offer that came to be known as the August Offer. The main terms of the offer were that the British would set up a representative body to frame the Constitution of India, safeguard the interests of minorities in case of constitutional changes, include Indian leaders on the Executive Council of the Viceroy, include British and Indian representatives in the War Advisory Council. However, the proposal was rejected by the Congress as it did not offer any time limit for the formation of the constitution framing body, and by the Muslim League because it did not give any assurance of a separate state, that is, Pakistan. By 1942, the war situation had worsened. Japan, who was fighting opposite Britain in the war, had attacked Burma and was marching towards Assam. It now became urgent for the British to solve the political crisis in India. In March 1942, the British government sent Sir Stafford Cripps, a member of the War Cabinet, to talk with the Indian political leaders and secure their support in Britain's war efforts. The main terms of his proposal were Dominion status would be given to India after the war. A constituent assembly consisting of members of lower houses of the Indian legislature would be established to draft a new constitution of India. The provinces would be free to either join the Indian Union or formulate their own constitutions. The interests of racial and religious minorities would be protected. The Viceroy of India would retain power during the war and would be responsible for the defense of the country. However, Cripps' proposal was rejected by Indians mainly because the British did not seem to be prepared for any effective transfer of power to the Indians. While Cripps' mission failed to initiate talks between India and the British, Mahatma Gandhi felt it was urgent that the British leave India in order to avoid Japanese attack on the country. At Wardha in July 1942, the Congress Working Committee adopted the Quit India resolution that demanded immediate end of British rule in India. The British responded with the arrest of Gandhi and other important nationalist leaders. The news of the arrests enraged the nation, and people from all walks of life revolted with hartals, demonstrations and processions. The government reacted with brutal lathi charges and arrests that further infuriated the people. They reacted violently by destroying police stations, post offices and other government buildings. The Quit India movement decisively established the British as outsiders and sparked a blazing nationalist spirit in people all over the country.
While the country was moving towards bringing the British Raj to its knees, other developments were also taking place. The Muslim League had started looking at Muslims as a separate nation, mainly because of the history of tension between the Hindus and the Muslims in the 1920s and 1930s. The provincial elections of 1937 led the League to believe that Muslims were a minority and would not be represented if India became a free and a democratic country. The League was annoyed with the Congress because the latter refused to form a joint Congress League in the United Provinces in 1937. Thus, the Muslim League tried to win over the Muslim masses in the early 1940s. During this time, most of the Indian Congress leaders were in jail. In the provincial election of 1946, the Congress did well in the general provinces, but the Muslim League did exceptionally well in the provinces where seats were reserved for Muslims. This made the League persist with the demand for a separate state. The British government sent a 3-member mission to Delhi to evaluate the situation, which suggested that India should remain united, with autonomy given to Muslim majority areas. The suggestion was refused by both the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League, making partition inevitable. After the failure of the cabinet mission, the Muslim League started a mass agitation and declared 16th August 1946 as Direct Action Day. as a demand for Pakistan. Riots broke out in Calcutta, which went on for days and left thousands dead. By March 1947, the violence spread across northern India and took a brutal turn. They left 100,000 people dead. Women faced atrocities and millions of people were forced to leave their homes and became refugees in other countries. Amidst the grief, India got its independence and a new nation, Pakistan, was born. Some of the leaders who played a prominent role in India's struggle for freedom were Maulana Azad was an active participant in the Gandhian movements. C. Rajagopalachari served as a member of the interim government of 1946 and became India's first Indian Governor-General. Sardar Patel played an important role in the negotiations for independence during 1945 to 1947 and integration of states. Abdul Ghaffar Khan was the founder of the Khudai Khidmatgars, a powerful non-violent movement among the Pathans of his province. What caused the Muslim League to begin viewing the Muslims as a separate nation from the Hindus? Excellent. The factors that allowed the Muslim League to grow. Excellent. The consequences of partition were excellent. Now, let us recapitulate what you have just learned in this animation.